You've probably heard this term full stack thrown around a lot in the tech world, right? But what does it really mean? Well, that's what we're here to figure out. We're going to break down full stack development piece by piece from the ground up. Let's dive in.
So, have you ever used an app and just stopped to think, how in the world was this actually built? From the buttons you tap to the information that just magically shows up on your screen, how does it all happen?
Well, the best way to wrap your head around it is to picture building a house. Yeah, a house. It's not just one giant block, right? It's made of all these different layers: the foundation, the walls, the roof, and each part has a specific job, but they all have to work together to make the whole thing stand. And the person who knows that entire blueprint inside and out, from the deep foundation all the way to the paint on the walls, that is your full stack developer. They're basically the master architect and general contractor all rolled into one, but for the digital world. Okay, so what's the official, textbook definition? Full stack development is really the whole shebang. It's the entire journey of creating a web application, from the very first sketch to the final launch. And that means building both the front end, that's all the stuff you actually see and touch, and the back end, which is like the hidden engine room that powers everything.
All right, so let's start with the part we all know and see, the front end. In our house analogy, this is the curb appeal, the facade, everything you see from the street.
Think of the front end as everything inside that house that you interact with. The paint color, the comfy sofa, where you put the TV. It's the whole user experience. In the digital world, that means all the buttons, the menus, the text, the images, basically anything and everything a person can see and interact with. And this is built using a few key tools. First up is HTML, which is like the raw structure, the studs and beams of the house. Then you've got CSS. That's all the design stuff, the paint, the wallpaper, the decor that makes it look amazing. And then there's JavaScript. JavaScript is the magic. It's the electricity, the light switches, the garage door opener. It makes everything do stuff. And for bigger projects, developers use frameworks, which are like pre-built kits that just make the whole construction process way, way faster.
Okay, but a pretty house is kind of useless if the lights don't turn on and the water doesn't run, right? And that brings us to the back end. This is the engine room, the stuff working hard behind the scenes that you never even see.
So the back end is all that invisible infrastructure. It's the concrete foundation, the plumbing in the walls, the wiring. It's what makes the house actually functional. In tech terms, we're talking about the server, the core logic of the application, all that heavy lifting. Yeah, the backend does all the serious work. It handles things like authentication, that's basically the security system, checking if your key works in the front door. It uses its own frameworks to manage all the incoming requests, and it talks to the front end using something called APIs. You can think of APIs as little messengers running back and forth, carrying notes between the pretty living room and the busy engine room.
All right, so we've got a beautiful house with a powerful engine. But where does it store all its stuff? Where do you keep the family photos or important documents? That leads us to our third super important layer, the database. This is the application's brain, its memory.
Back to our house metaphor, the database is like a giant, perfectly organized filing cabinet, or maybe a library. It's where every piece of important information is carefully stored and can be pulled out whenever it's needed. We're talking user profiles, product lists, your order history. All that crucial data lives right here. And there are basically two main styles for these filing cabinets. You've got your SQL databases, which are super structured, like a spreadsheet with rigid rows and columns. Everything has its place. Then you have NoSQL databases, which are way more flexible, kind of like a folder full of individual documents. Which one you choose really just depends on the kind of information you need to store. So, okay, we've got our three big layers: the front end, the back end, and the database. The question is, how do you actually get them to work together as one cohesive unit? Well, instead of just grabbing random tools and hoping for the best, developers usually use proven combinations of technologies. Think of it like a recipe that are designed to work perfectly together. And this recipe has a name. It's called a stack. One of the most popular stacks out there right now is called the MERN stack. What's cool about it is that almost every single piece of it uses the same language, JavaScript. So M is for MongoDB, that's our flexible database. E is for Express, the framework for our backend. R is for React, our front-end library. And N is for Node.js, the environment that actually runs the backend code. See? MERN. But MERN isn't the only game in town, not by a long shot. There's the mean stack, which is almost identical. It just swaps out React for another front-end tool called Angular. And then you've got the old school, super reliable LAMP stack. This thing is a workhorse. It's been powering a massive chunk of the web for years using stuff like Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. It really just goes to show there are different stacks for different jobs.
Now, you might be thinking, with all these different pieces and maybe multiple people working on them, how do you keep track of the master blueprint? That's where an absolutely essential tool called Git comes in. Git is like a time machine for your code. It records every single change so you can see who changed what and when, and if something breaks, you can just rewind back to a version that worked. It's a lifesaver.
So, does this sound kind of cool? Maybe you're even wondering, hey, how could I become a full-stack developer? Well, believe it or not, there's a pretty well-trodden path.
It usually starts with the basics. You've got to master HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, the foundations of the web. Then you'd probably learn a front-end framework like React to build cooler, more complex stuff. From there, you jump to the backend, getting comfortable with Node.js and Express. Then you tackle databases, maybe something like MongoDB. And then comes the most critical step of all. You actually build a complete project. You put all those pieces together and deploy a real app for the world to see. And that's really what this is all about. The big takeaway here is that being full stack isn't just about a fancy job title. It's like a creative superpower. It's the ability to take an idea that's just in your head and turn it into a real, tangible thing that people can use all by yourself from scratch.
You have the entire toolkit from foundation to finish, which really only leaves one question left to ask. So what are you going to build?